Hello, John. Thank you for coming to the show.
Good to be here with you and everybody else.
Right. I don't know how many people are in the room at the moment, but I will find out. Just to remind the audience, please make sure you click the links that are in the description of this video and all the videos that I do with John. That will take you to his website so you can sign up for his periodicals, also sign up for a reading. We're going to go into detail about what that is later in the show, but please make sure that you click those links, go to his website, and help support John's work. It's really important.
And and also and also hit that button.
All right, hit the
Something
like
hit
button,
that like button.
hit the
Hit it
like button,
now.
and make
And
sure
if
you
you've
share
liked these shows, hit it now. If you're the first time you're here, at some moment, if you really like what we're doing, hit that button because that simple little move brings so much more attention to the algorithm, which will bring more people into the show, and that will help us continue to do this show.
That's right. In addition, the ones that are watching on YouTube, we're live streaming, but we're also simulcasting on X Spaces. The intent of this show is to take questions. So please ask for the mic when you have questions on X Spaces. If you are watching on YouTube, please type them in the chat and I will read them for you. But thank you for joining. I greatly appreciate it. All
Yes,
right,
thank you,
John.
everybody.
Where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with what some of the stuff that we were talking about before we started the show. I think the thing that here we are close to New Year's, and we are about to enter a pivotal year. For instance, 2026 is a very pivotal year because it's the first year for the second and more intense half of the Roaring 2020s, something I've been calling the 2020s, starting in the early 1990s when it was so far away that it would be a pivotal year for either the success of human civilization or being hit back a few hundred years or thousand years, or going bravely forward beyond what it is known. And it's so big that I'm spending my time writing a special report for my Hogue Prophecy Report subscribers with some freebies that will come for all of you as well to sample, but it's going to be different. It's not just going to predict 2026, but I'm going to take my audience into an overview of significant prophecies for the next 5 years. So it's called Hogue Prophecy Report 2026, um, and the second half of the Roaring 2020s. So hopefully you will think to subscribe to it, and we'll talk a little later about how you can. It's probably going to come out in February because I'm taking my time to really, because I'm dealing with the whole half 5 years. I'm taking my time to release it in February. But if you join Hogue Prophecy Reports as a subscriber, I will give you my last report for free. So between now and February, anybody that subscribes, a new subscriber gets that. So, but we'll talk about how that, I'll talk about that again shortly. But let's get into it. The situation is that a lot of people in the prophecy field, as well as myself, are really seeing 2026 being a decisive year. And I think a lot of people, a lot of my sources too, are really good in the independent free media. Are also, I would have to say, I have pushed back and say that they're, as a prophecy scholar and also somebody who predicts the future, um, a lot of people have this idea that World War III only happens when nuclear bombs are launched. Maybe it's because of too much conditioning since 1962 with Dr. Strangelove onwards. Great movie, by the way, but this whole idea that people have forgotten that nuclear war has the highest chance of actually being caused, starting first as a conventional world war. And it has been my contention, and I predict that people in the future will amend this fault when they realize, just like people did in World War II, that World War II technically could have not just started in 1939. Um, I think the bias of Western civilization and Western historians kind of overlook the fact that the invasion of 1 million Japanese soldiers into China, into a war that raged starting with the bombing of Shanghai and other things that raged in 1937, sorry, in 1937, that World War II actually started in 1937. It got on the radar blip of Western bias by erupting then in 1939 with Hitler invading Poland. But you could also include the Sudetenland crisis, which happened a year or so before, in the Munich Compromise that happened as appeasement, as many people think of it, by the West. That was a part of World War II that started in 1937. Now, there was this amazing show that's still out there, and I highly recommend it if you want to get a feeling of the timing of history. There was a show with these dedicated people, Americans and others that live in Sweden, called World War II Week by Week. And what they had done is every week they would do a new show for that 7 days of the 6 year conflict. And they spent 6 years doing it. Fortunately, I came late to know that they were there, so I only had to go through a year and a half, week by week. But I came across it, and to watch these episodes. And if you want to do a binge. You can do it now because it's all done. But watch these episodes. What I came to understand is that we have in our minds, all of us do it, where we think World War, okay, there's got to be fighting everywhere, and that's why it's a world war. But that's not how it happens. It's like what Paul was saying earlier about having you have let's call this little thing that's bouncing vibratorially a destiny bounce. And, at first, the war is like a funnel in time. It's like this. And around 1937, 1939, every time it hits the top or the bottom of the cone, that's when, okay, here's the first bump. That's Shanghai, when the Japanese started bombing Shanghai, invading Japan. The next bump is Poland, Hitler's invasion of Poland, which everybody officially calls that the World War II. But when it was raging, nobody called it that. Just like back during the Great Depression, nobody called it the Great Depression until it was over in 1942 and onwards. Then, otherwise, all through the 1930s, everybody called it the Great Recession. Just like we call what has been our Great Depression a deficit spending depression that I contend started in 2007, 2008. We're already a long time into a greater depression that's masked by our deficit spending. And I predict that someday people will go back and have to say, okay, this is when it started. There's already people that see that, but I think the majority will finally come around. Um, the so I have, looking at prophecy, I have seen that there have been actually now two Cold Wars. The first Cold War started with the Berlin airlift when the Soviet Union tried to cancel all roads of Western supply into Berlin so that it would then be absorbed into the Soviet Union. It was the first big test of strength of Stalin against the Allies. And he kind of thought, since they were all leaving and there wasn't so much of a force there, they could try that. But then they did an airlift, and in an airlift that lasted through from 1948 into 1949. Finally, the Soviets had to pull back and open up the roads to Western Germany and into Eastern Germany to allow the supply to continue. That was the beginning of the Cold War. And that Cold War lasted until 1989. Actually, officially, it was canceled, called over by Gorbachev and President George H.W. Bush, the senior president, not junior, uh, in December of 1989. Now, what's very intriguing is there's a very interesting prophecy in Nostradamus that seems to talk about that. And it's one of those rare quatrain indexing prophecies where the index is a date. Not all of them. Mario Reading tried to make them all that way back in the late 90s. He is among the only four of us in 4.7 centuries that have attempted to translate what has been incorrectly called the complete prophecies of Nostradamus, which is those prophecies that have the two prophetic letters of Nostradamus and about 1184 quatrains of Le Prophète, which was his serialized release of quatrain four-line poems that most of us, if you encounter Nostradamus for the first time, that's where you go. What I'm currently working on right now is something no published, well-known Nostradamian scholar in 4.7 centuries has ever done. I am now finishing my translation of a much larger body of Nostradamus's prophetic works that showed up in his many almanacs that he wrote every year, from 15 published in 1550 to posthumous final publishing of the last one in 1567. And like his verses, which have been more known, his verses in prose, his presages in verse, that is, quatrains that are about 154 of them, that sometimes appear as addendums to the main La Prophétie Mass. He will You notice some interesting things that although a lot of it's about local history or it's sometimes spot on when it makes by month, like in an almanac, 12 months, it does prophecies for each month and the moon cycles and all of that. And these prophecies in prose, not in poetry, much easier to translate, by the way, are will often jump months ahead to things that sound like, oh, we missed that by a few months, or sometimes it jumps up decades. And on a very rare level, and some of his most magnificent verse prophecies are actually in the presages that jump all the way into World War II and 20th century, and then some of them look like they might go even farther. So, he's kind of in that unstuck, Billy Pilgrim unstuck in time mode that happens with prophecy. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see if somebody actually translated them? Because not even the French translate them or try to figure them out. They're usually just collected. And like his secretary, Chauvigny, 40 years later, after he was a young secretary to Nostradamus in the 1580s and 90s, he tried to gather them all together in the disparate different editions that were out there of the almanacs. One was missing in 1551. All the others survived the test of time by then, so he lopped them all together in two books. Uh, but he only wrote random little one-line or two-line notes in these, so he didn't really try to interpret them. And there's some marvelous scholars, one of them being Chevignard, who did a marvelous job of putting all the French together. It's in French, but he admits he's not a prophet. He's not somebody who can interpret them. So I do make predictions, and I'm accurate to be 80% or more. And so I am doing it, and I have taught myself 16th century French, over 50 years of work with it. And, now that I'm in my 70s, I'm coming to the completion of this. So anyway, the, the, uh, the work of Nostradamus is going to be greatly expanded beyond what most people in the last 4.7 centuries know about it. When I begin to serialize at the end of 2028, 2029, 2030, and 2031, the four volumes. It could be five. I don't know yet. I'm in uncharted water. I don't know how big the interpretations of the presages and prose is going to get, but it could be a quintology rather than a tetralogy. But I this will be my final work on Nostradamus after a lifetime of study, my last word on it. I'm in that period of life where it's really wonderful to have your final word on themes that you've been working on for so long. Um, and so anyway, I got a little off on the tangent there, but back to World War II, you get you get these interesting situations where if you watch World War II week by week, suddenly there's a month of great violence in Poland. And it's like, the war has happened. And then there's like 9 months of this. The Blitzkrieg was followed, the Lightning War was followed by the Sitzkrieg, a sitting war where French were on the borders of Germany in the Siegfried Line, and basically nothing happened. It was and then so there's lulls. There are lulls. There are explosions of stuff there. And as the war gets more like the cone, it's going dink don't. But as it narrows down, it goes dink don't, dink don't, dink. Then you get an escalation. By the time they were in 1943, 44, there was all kinds of things to talk about. The weeks were full of all kinds of things to talk about going on around the world. But these things, even in world wars, even in World War One, a similar thing. They take their time, and there's a lot of lulls and pauses in these great wars. Um, and it's the same with consider the Napoleonic Wars. If you think of all the 8 coalitions of royals that tried to overthrow the French Revolution and later overthrow the upstart Napoleon the First, if you actually deal with the fighting time of the campaigns, it's just a few months, and then there's lulls and a few months. But in our minds, I guess it may be because we watch a lot of television, I don't know, and movies and look at the phone. We get this kind of feeling that, well, it's keep it moving, or rather, I'm not so interested in it. But really, even the most violent wars have long, long lulls. And so in a similar way, the Cold War, the first Cold War, ended in 1998. And then there was a long lull between wars, almost as long as between the two world wars. And then suddenly there was in 2014, what I see is that we had Cold War II begin. And I always predicted, from what I looked in other seers and what I also felt, that it would be a far shorter war that had a far more likely possibility of going hot. And it started in 2024 when the United States under Obama sent Victoria Nuland as Deputy Secretary of State to finance with $4 billion basically what was an overthrow of the democratically elected government of Ukraine, and replacing it through violence in the Maidan coup with a fascist regime of Banderites, the same Ukrainian fascists that were Hitler's best allies who weren't Germans. They were so good and they were so dedicated to the Nazi cause and racial supremacy that most of the death camps, most of the working people who were making them function, they might have had German officers and non-commissioned officers, but most of them were run by Ukrainian fascists and the Banderite fascists of the OUN. And what literally happened in 2024 was literally the resurrection into public of the same kind of people with the same flags, Nazi symbols, the emblem of the Galicia SS division. The Ukrainians were so embraced by the SS, the German SS, that they gave them their own foreign, this big, like 20,000 man division, Galicia. which is what the old name in the Austro-Hungarian Empire was the name of the Western Ukrainian region that we now see as the been kind of since the trade of land between Hitler and Stalin got thrown into the Russian world as which was a big mistake. So anyway, because it doesn't belong to the Russian world. But and what also happened in Ukraine is a whole lot of states were then by Lenin and then Khrushchev were also, which were Russian, were always Russian oblasts, provinces for hundreds of years, were suddenly told, oh, you're in Ukraine now and you're Ukrainians. And of course, so you got all these disparate people who never were asked to be together, and they're ordered to be your, then suddenly, and Ukraine has never itself ever been a nation. It's an accident, I'm sorry to say, I'm part Ukrainian, so I can kind of get away with that criticism. I'm Ukrainian, Jewish Ukrainian as well as Russian and White Russian and a lot of Scandinavian Viking connections that they all have. It's all in my bloodstream. So, I mean, Hogue is a French, Norwegian, Viking, Norman name for Normandy, so it's one of the Norman names, La Hogue, my clan of Vikings. And so um, it it is so you have I mean, you have a situation where you have a country that's name means hinterland. So what's your country's name? Oh, well, it's either called borderland or hinterland. Ah, so that means you're a border or a hinterland of somebody else? Well, yeah. So it's never, so in 1991, it became a country. It was never that planned. The Soviet Union never planned it. The Russians and the Ukrainians never planned it, but suddenly it became a country. But it's a country that has a whole lot of people in it that, well, it has one group that wants to dominate everybody, and that's the Western Ukrainians who lean towards extreme right-wing nationalism, ultimately Banderite fascism, which is in the Western half. And then, so anyway, I'm kind of setting out the stage, which is important to remember because this Cold War ended or started, sorry, in 2014. And then 8 years later, as I predicted, 7 to 8 years later, it began to be a real shooting war with Russia provoked to save the Russian-speaking people who had been shelled and massacred for 8 years. I watched it all, and because the people that America put into power, which were fascists and changed all the rules, started to say the first thing they said is you can't speak Russian anymore. All Russian signs are abolished. They were basically not, this is form of genocide. This is where you try to erase people, just like when you blow up Palestinian churches in Gaza, Palestinian mosques, Palestinian universities that can train and teach the next generation of Palestinians, and then you go murder all the people. Well, that was going on in the 8 years between 2014 and 2022 in the Eastern Ukrainian, mostly Russian-speaking oblasts, which historically had never had any connection with Ukraine, forced by dictators to live with each other, not by choice. And name me any country that's successful that doesn't have the people involved in that country, like the United States, 13 colonies, very disparate, different colonies, some slaves, some not, but they all agreed to make a try together to make a country. This situation is unique in the world. These people never were asked. They never even wanted. They suddenly all are together. I mean, I feel for the Western Ukrainians as well, who don't want to be with the Russians and vice versa, or all the Poles that are actually in Lvov, in eastern Ukraine. That the capital of that eastern Ukrainian area is actually the capital of that oblast is majority Polish. So and the Ukrainian Nazis during World War II in a series of massacres in 1943 killed hundreds of thousands of Polish civilians. and then turned on hundreds of thousands of Russian civilians. And so this is not a good formula for a good future. It takes no Nostradamus to predict that Ukraine, in the way it's been set up, has no future. And it has been, I spent a little time on this because this is where the Cold War ended. The second Cold War ended in 2022 in February, late February, and a shooting World War III began its conventional phase. We've been in World War III since February 2022, so I contend. And it has the similar sporadic eruptions. Call it Shanghai was in 37. There's been attempts to make Taiwan erupt almost a few times, a little bit of saber rattling over there, and then it goes quiet for a while. You have the main center, you might call it the the Polish conflict of 1939 in the East, in Eastern Europe and Russia is the big fighting war, the biggest war, this big theater of war since the Second World War is conventional, being fought. Millions have died, mostly Ukrainians, unfortunately. I mean, I'm just going to put it in here that with what I know, what's really going down on the ground, if you hear and you constantly hear it on the mainstream news, oh, the Russians are losing 7,000 people a day and all of that. If they're losing that many people, why is the Ukrainian line breaking up? Why has Prokop's fallen with 10,500 Ukrainians trapped if the Russians are losing so many? And why is it that these retard leaders of Europe and NATO keep telling us how Russia is this great threat that's going to come for them next, when in the same day they'll be saying the Russian army is about to break and buckle because it's losing in human meat waves, charging over piles of their own dead? The Ukrainians. I've been watching this war for 4 years. I watch all sides of it, and I'm always looking for those piles of dead Russians that the Ukrainian guys are talking about. I can't find them, but I can find reports by anti-Putin Russian groups that have located, I think they're Maradona or something. I can't remember the name, but they have a rarity in the Western press and investigative reporting. They really wanted to find out how many Russians are dead, and they're not very happy about what they found because they're one of the few Western centric groups of people that have actually used a classic investigative reporting rather than make narratives and propaganda about what's going on, like the goat of Kiev, or the ghost of Kiev that shot down 30 jets, and then they had a goat somehow that managed to shoot down a jet. And come on, folks. That was early in the war. Um, what these people did, Media Zona, that's their name, is that they're based in Latvia, but they have agents, all well, not agents, but investigators, Russians that don't like the regime, all over Russia, looking and using records and computer records to target every notice of any soldier who's getting a funeral. And they have done really great work trying to find all of that, and then make estimates of what might be missing. People are still missing or not recovered or not. And long story short, the shocking reality, which has got them very frustrated, because they want the meat waves and millions. They want to have so many death certificates for funerals that Russian cemeteries are like these vast fields of Ukrainian flags that can be seen from space since this war started in 2022, because there are so many Ukrainian dead that it's really tragic. But the possible number of Russian soldiers killed in action is probably somewhere around 120 to 180,000. Now that's not a small number. Vietnam, after 10 years of it, we lost 57,000. This thing's only been going on for 4 years, and there's 180,000 dead Russians. But unfortunately, there are around there are a million dead Ukrainians and a further million wounded and crippled Ukrainian soldiers that cannot go back to the front. So, and then there's a lot of people missing, and it's very difficult to find out how many of these Ukrainians are really missing, or that the officer corps above major to the generals is pilfering through the funds that are supposed to be sent to their wives, their widows, their families to help them live without the loss of a son, a father. Uh, they're pocketing it and saying they're missing. And they can do that if they have to actually, they hate it when the Russians and some soulful Ukrainians are trying through Belarus to get the recovered bodies of the dead Ukrainians and Russians passed over the border so they are identified and they can have a proper burial. They hate it to death, these generals, because that means they have to officially mark all those guys, thousands, a few dozen Russians, several thousand Ukrainians. That's usually the trade of corpses and bags and body bags and refrigerators is like that. So that's giving you an indication of just how one-sided the destruction of the Ukrainian army is to what is going on now. So anyway, that is so MediaZona tried to stay on track for 3 years, and then finally they started to fudge the numbers so it would look. They were getting so much pressure from the U.S. news and the European news and European leaders. Why don't you make more numbers of dead? We're saying there's meat piles of Russian deads. Why aren't you finding them? Why don't you change the way you do it? So they kind of compromised their own counting, and now they've got it higher. And frankly, this really rare and valuable source of real reporting from the Western side is now no longer useful to me because they're now lying like everybody else is. They finally were pressured to lie and start telling lies. So the total death toll and wounded in action that cannot go back into the front is probably will be around a quarter million Russians, 250,000 total dead and wounded. But Ukraine is 10 times more. But anyway, that's it's I have a certain thread that I want to talk about, and we're still on that thread, but I just feel that I contend that you all are so starved, maybe not even knowing how starved you are, of misinformation, of and you know it's a very important thing, especially with this third world war, I just try as few as I can reach or many as I can reach. I just try to help at least make you consider that maybe you're being lied to a level that transcends what happened to the German people under Goebbels. And it's a world war, and this one could go nuclear. And a lot of my prophetic work about prophecies of world war, which I did in a book, A New Cold War, which I wrote just when this new Cold War started in 2014, I laid out Nostradamus, Edgar Cayce, a whole, strangely enough, a lot of German from medieval times to the present, well, to the early 20th century, we're seeing three world wars. And so I'd start with the first two, how they predicted it, and quite remarkably and in the clear. And then I talked about the Third World War and one of the most important dangers, and I see it alive and well, threatening all of our futures, is that misinformation the weapon of misinformation, the misuse of all this revolution of communication to actually not enlighten you, but put you in complete darkness with your eyes wide shut to a conventional war that could suddenly become, in one moment, coming at you and over in 20, that phase of World War III might only last 72 minutes, and your civilization is gone. You are gone, and if you're not gone, you will envy the dead. That's the nightmare potential that compels me sometimes, and I know bothers some people, to take these tangents where I go deep onto the same themes again, because these themes, what's going on in Ukraine, your life is at stake. Your life is at stake. And as Sornberger said, and he was this Bavarian cowherd in the 1700s, late 1700s, who said, with open eyes will the people of the world walk into the catastrophe of the Third World War. Your eyes are open. You're looking at your phones with eyes open. You're looking at your TVs. You're looking at your iPads. You're looking at all the more modern and wonderful stuff, which I look at too. But your eyes are open mostly on shut down lies, propaganda. And now it's, as always happens with wars of narrative, the narrative is being overtaken by reality. And the danger is that even the leaders of the world who are fighting this war against Russia, who actually created the situation by advancing for 30 years NATO up to the Russian borders, putting bases there, aiming missiles there. And then in 2008, they wanted to, well, let's bring Ukraine in. And the Russians started saying, says, that's our red line. If Ukraine becomes part of NATO, you will then have your missiles moved up to the soft underbelly of the historical Russia, where all of your Western European 800 years worth of invasions have come to try to destroy our people and break up this land. And you will be having your nukes on the northern Ukrainian border with a 4 minutes or less launch time to take out Moscow. About the same amount of time that the Cuban missiles that the Soviets put there aimed at Washington could do to Washington, D.C. And Kennedy and the United States was ready to go to war in October of 1962, invade Cuba even, to prevent that from happening because it was an existential threat. And most of you probably don't even know how what's been going on with Ukraine since 2008 and is now a full-scale war, and NATO desperately wanting to train the Ukrainians de facto NATO army. And this is with open eyes. One day you're going to wake up and everything's set on fire, and you won't know. You won't even know what killed you before you're flashed out, if you're lucky enough not to be a survivor of this. So that's a nightmare. I just put scenario that is potentially looming, and it's looming even more so. We've already sweated through at least 3 Cuban Missile amped up crises since this war started. And 2 of them were in 2024 and 2025. So 2026 is a dangerous year because, as I predicted in 2022 and set down in Hogue Prophecy articles at that time, that the most dangerous part that's going to happen is when the Russians are winning this war, as I said they would, through attrition, and they're winning this war because they also, in a war of attrition, I mean, Ukrainians do, if you lose in modern war, the domination of the air over your head, uh, and this is through air forces and now drones. The Ukrainians actually were way ahead of anybody, including the Russians, with drones. But there's one thing the Russians have had these 800 years of Western invasions through Ukrainian vassals or others, is that they learn from their mistakes, which we do not in the West. We keep trying it again. Only this time, so what is dangerous now is the European leaders are in a panic. They've been shooting up with their own propaganda and getting high on it, and now they're going cold turkey with reality. And now they've squandered all their weapons. Conventional options are dwindling to near zero, meaning that there's only one other option left, and that is, oh, let's talk ourselves in dropping a tactical nuclear weapon on an advancing Russian army. That'll probably end the war. Just one nuke, just like World War II only had two atom bombs thrown at people and it ended the war. I'm going to talk myself into that and ignore all the other consequences or ignore all the other warnings that the Russians have been very clearly giving us. No, 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 no. I'm going to still, even now, as Russia's winning the war, I'm still going to believe that, oh, the big dumb Russians are trying to pull out uh, chips out of ice boxes and stuff, and that they're big dumb Russians, and they don't have any body armor anymore, and all that, and that's absolute crap, dangerous crap. Because if you believe that shit, and if your leaders are starting to believe their own copium, what are they going to do when it all unravels? Which is going to happen. It is happening already, but attrition wars are slow, and they have successfully are destroying the Ukrainian army, and it's starting to show. So you watch in the next few months, you're going to see there'll be some movement now because there's not enough Ukrainians to hold the line. It's already happening. If you want to see it day by day, watch Military Summary Channel. It's the best of the mappers that do map work every day. It does 2 sessions a day. It's from Dima, who lives in Minsk in White Russia and Belarusia. I think that's where he is, and he's I think the best of them all. He brings it all really together and very accurate. And you will see the map. You will see what really is happening because he doesn't just do it. He does a little link where he says, "Here's the footage. Here's the video. Here's where they geolocated the situation in the battle." And he's very careful not to confirm anything until he really has data. So right now you just think military summary, 2 words. You type it in tomorrow and on YouTube and start watching, and you'll see what's really going on. And I've been watching it for 4 years, and it's very accurate. And things are unraveling. So anyway, so the only way I can see that we are not going to see this World War III that's been happening. It's already 4 years old, and now it's going to enter into its fifth year by February. So it's almost as long as World War II was. Um, it's getting its fifth. It'll be, if it's still around in 2027, it'll be as long as World War II. And it has its fronts, Ukraine being the big hot spot, but there's also the potential of Taiwan, which almost comes into flame, but has avoided itself. But there are people planning to go big into Taiwan in 2027, 2028. A lot of the planners of the United States are thinking that. You have also Venezuela as being another possible eruption. You see, the problem is that I will talk about this in Hogue prophecy reports, but a lot of the people aren't talking about this except my sources and me. And that is that a world war is usually a bigger struggle between two civilizations. I mean, here was Hitler with his upstart Nazi white supremacist civilization, the Aryan civilization that he was trying to establish in the world. against the world that had a different way of looking at things. Uh, and so now we have a situation also Middle East with Israel is a very big and active front that could also explode. So you have like in the early stages of World War II, you have maybe two or three places where fighting is happening scattered across the world. We're doing the same thing. And so the so you have two of the fronts that have been active coming to a crisis point, a decision point in the end of this year and 2026. And one of them that we've talked about on this show a lot is what's going to happen in the Netanyahu Zionist government, which has is trying to repeat history rhyme with Nazi Germany, with its causing a Holocaust that is threatening the lives of over 2 million Palestinians, with at least 700,000 civilians already dead in Gaza Strip. And also, a lot of them are not being counted in the West Bank. This is history's rhyming. In this world war, we also have a Holocaust going on. And the other thing too is that Netanyahu, the prime minister, is actually may convince the legal system of Israel to give him a full pardon without him stepping down from office. It's just give him the pardon. And the thing is that the he has performed well in kind of getting this idea that look, this is our last chance to take care of all the business that we have with all the Arabs around us, and create our Eretz Israel and our greater Israeli Reich, and it is. It's so close. It's so close. It's just like what happened in the early years of World War II. The Nazis we're so close. We've almost defeated Russia. We're at the approaches of Moscow. It's so close. It's so close. We're already setting up for the Holocaust of worldwide Jewry, and everything is working our way, and we're always gambling. It's always like we're always offsetting our enemies because we're kind of crazy. We're kind of doing crazy war, crazy offenses. We're breaking all the rules. Problem is, which happened in World War II, after a while, after a few years, your enemy starts to see your pattern if you don't change it. If you just keep doing the same thing again and again, and it's working because, frankly, what you're doing is bat doo-doo crazy. You're acting like a maniac, and more sane people in the world who are fighting you are surprised by what level you will go to win. But there's a problem with that. You keep getting compelled to do more, to gamble more in this insane way of waging war, and the last step is looming is that Netanyahu has worked his life, his adult life, to create an America that is right where he wants it to be, as a um, as a paid off government that is going to do the bidding of little Israel. He knows he can't win this war if he can't pull the United States into something in it. And Iran is the major final step. He's managed to, put Hezbollah in a corner, wipe out Syria as a country, and replace it with a vassal who used to be one of the deputies of ISIS and Al Qaeda. So now Syria is an Al Qaeda state, and so he is tamed the Arabs. He is eradicating the Palestinians. He's got to do that last step because Iran's the last step, and the problem is that Iran, if he hits them, they will devastate Israel. And that will probably pull the United States in. He's actually wanting his own people to be devastated if he can get the United States to go in and do all the heavy lifting, and your sons and daughters for Israel first fight and die in a war that they will also not win. So, and then what happens when you've done that? Then what happens when in the front in Ukraine, the Ukrainians are falling apart and they're running, chased by drones, and it's all unraveling now. The Russians are advancing and they're taking all the Russian speaking states and they're getting right up to the Dnieper River. They're taking Odessa and they're doing all of that, and you can't stop them. And your little picayune European armies um, are so small and so untrained and so moribund that if you send them in, they're just going to be slaughtered. So then what you got left in the quiver? You've got nukes. So so that's some of the things that are looming for us. They've always been there since this thing has happened, but now they're really, it's like they had options before, not to keep it. They had options to keep this thing, the West, keep this war, these wars manageable and conventional. But in 2026, they lose that option. So they have only two options. Admit their defeat, man up and woman up and admit their defeat, and negotiate some peaceful solution, something that keeps the European security locked in. They're going to have a big surprise because the Russians don't want to invade you, Europeans. In fact, they never have invaded you. I'll say it, I've done it in other shows, I'll say it again. Name me one time when, in the last 800 years, when Europe was invading Russia, that Russia reacted and chose a war of choice. I mean, all the invasions of Russia were wars of choice that didn't need to happen, all the way back to the Teutonic Knights in 1242 AD, when it all this stuff, this trying to destroy Russian people and their culture and their civilization began for greed of the resources that are there. I mean, we have Kaya Kallas, who's the ersatz foreign minister of the European Union. She's openly from little Latvia or Estonia, I guess. She's openly saying, "Well, why can't we break up Russia? There's this little mouse that roared country that she comes from." Says, "Well, why can't we? Why can't we break up Russia and use their resources? They have too many. We need the resources." And it's like this is a statement that's in history for 800 years, over 800 years. So if you look at it, you will not find ever a time when the Russians invaded Europe as a choice to conquer it. Never happened. Now, it is true that when the Russians have come into Europe, they've been invited as allies of European nations to defeat tyranny in Europe, like Napoleon's tyranny. Those coalitions, most of the time, the Russian armies fought and died for Europeans and then went home. So, so this idea, this that I mean, when I saw Mark Rutte, the new retard that is running NATO as general secretary just last week, he's saying the darkness is approaching and it's now here. And if I had been in that place where he was saying, I said, "Yeah, I'm looking at him. It's you. You're wearing a black suit. The darkness is you. You're the darkness coming in to destroy Europe." And Europe. So anyway, this is some of the things that are going to happen. Now, on a positive note, terror, horror, and terror has its good side in an alchemic sense. If stuff that is happening, it's really scary, is happening, it wakes you up. Suddenly, you got to wake up and smell the World War III going nuclear. That means people start to become alert. That one thing that we can take away from this is being scared straight as a human species by what we are about to step into, which is probably something that has happened to many extraterrestrial civilizations beyond our own world, where it's the Fermi paradox. It's where Fermi was one of the people who created the atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project. He actually created the first nuclear reactor for it, a rudimentary reactor in the Manhattan Project. Um, there was even some possibility that he was sharing some of the information with Soviet Union because he thought one country can't have this power. If there's only one country that has this power, they'll use it to dominate the world. So a lot of the scientists were actually, some of them got caught doing it, were actually informing the Soviet Union what they were doing so that if the Soviet Union then could make a deterrent atomic bomb, then the United States would not do what it was already planning to do. I mean, there was plans. Even Churchill was involved in the post-war situation. They were going to the NATO, rudimentary NATO was going to invade, but they were going to drop atomic bombs across Russia. MacArthur almost used atomic bombs on China to end the Korean War. And at that time, um, they could have it. As you see now, if you see how American hegemonic power has always been latent in there, the only reason why a World War III didn't happen in the late 40s or by 1950, as a lot of seers then were kind of looking and seeing it as a potential, like Andre Lamont, who was a very good Nostradamus scholar, he thought that there would be a war in the East and it would be America against China. And there was actually plans for that. But when Russia lit their own atomic weapon, those plans went out the window. And that's why we're all alive. So, so must have been an amazing decision of ethics to be building an atomic bomb for the free world, quote unquote. Tell that to all the colonial victims of the free world. Um, in Africa and China and South Vietnam and North Vietnam and all those places, but Cambodia and all that. But anyway, I don't get too deep into that. But the 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 deterrent of both the superpowers having the bombs has actually given us all these years since World War II to now kind of follow our unconsciousness again and walk with our eyes wide shut into a situation which is very quantum high potentials more possible now because the leaders are ignoring their people in Europe. They're literally throwing money at Ukraine even more now, and Europe is actually falling apart. And with the astrology that we're entering next year and in the latter halves of the 2020s is into the 2030s is one word. It is very, very amendable and encouraging of revolution. You're going to see revolutions across Europe. You're going to see the people finally. What'll have to happen is just like with the French Revolution, it's got to be a point where they can't eat anymore. They can't survive because the economy is literally killing their future, killing their ability to survive. That's what happened in France in 1798. Oh, sorry, 1789. Dyslexic. Um, it's it's bread, no hope, no future. That will make anyone who has people back then, the last thing they wanted to do was get on barricades and go to war with the king and all that. Really, it hasn't changed. The costumes have changed. The people of Europe don't want to do this, but they will be compelled because your leaders are out of control. And we have a similar thing that could happen here in the United States. Um, it's out of control. And what then has to happen is something will trigger the people to rise up and take charge and take out their, overthrow their governments and all that. And it doesn't mean that it will be a better situation, but this is what can happen. And this is very much a window of coming into its window, entering into its window of probability that has not ever happened since. And so I'll just finish this rant by saying that I have a lot of things to say about 2026, and hopefully you will check out the Hogue Prophecy Report. I mean, one of the things you can do is you can go to my website, hogueprophecy.com, which is linked here. With Paul's linked it here, and you can then freely read the samples of new articles that are there. And it also has a way that you can join $60 for a year, or you can do an automatic payment per month of $6. I mean, it's just $5 a month. And the most important thing I want to remind you as I finish this is not just to read and see a possible alternative reality, fact-based and with sources. Um, I mean, don't stop. I watch the mainstream news. I used to be on the mainstream news a whole lot. All of you name MS, NBC, CNN, Fox. I've been on Fox debating Sean Hannity. I've been on all the legacy, ancient prophecies. NBC was major shows in the 90s. I have been on CBS. I've been on The View. I've been on Good Morning America, and I've been in London and the BBC, Hong Kong. I've had audiences of 150 million listeners of BBC International Radio. I've had 64 million Russians on one night watching me talk about Edgar Cayce's prophecy about Russia perhaps being the hope of the world. And that was in end of 2017. And in that show, I was saying it's very likely that you're going to be in a fighting war, shooting war very soon. And that could end up being a second Cold War or a World War III. So here we are. Uh, so just what I really want to also share with you is not just what I'm writing, but look at my links of the articles that I've written and discover my sources. They're fascinating and they're accurate, and I've spent decades collecting them. Check them out. And at least you don't have to believe what I'm saying, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't believe. Believers are useless in this situation. Whether you just snap judgment, oh, John Hogue, I believe everything he says. No, no, don't do that. Test what I'm saying. Go to other media outlets where I contend real news is happening, and and then you know just don't be a drone of under other people's control, because that's the recipe for you all and us walking with our eyes wide open into these catastrophes called a turn of World War III into a nuclear war. Anyway, that's all. Do we have?
Yeah,
Thank. If you've been waiting to ask your question, sorry for being so long, but it's an important thing.
let me just remind the audience, if you want the mic on X Spaces, just ask for it and you can ask your question. For the ones that are in the chat for YouTube, type in your question. So, John, I ran a poll and asked the audience if they thought World War III started, and 60% thought that it did start. So I thought that was interesting.
It
But
is.
so there was a question by Core, and it's about Edgar Cayce.
Hmm.
John, I read Edgar Cayce years ago. He missed California falling into the sea, fortunately.
Hmm.
Will it still happen?
Well, it's interesting, Cora, that you bring that up because Edgar Cayce uh, uh, there was a book that I think is one of the most important books that the ARE group had ever published by Edgar Casey's son, Hugh Lynn, who wrote a lot about his father and been quite a bridge to his father. But there's one book that's very rare. You can hardly find it anywhere. And it's a book that Hugh Lynn Casey wrote about why my father got things wrong. The prophecies that didn't come true, which were so rare but he still found them. And he talked about how Edgar Casey, when he saw that a prediction he made failed, he didn't do what so many people do on these talk shows and all and try to excuse his way out of it. Uh, he didn't do what I did with the late Ian Punnett once, back in when I used to do his weekend show on Coast to Coast AM. I mean, he cornered me on some certain things I made predictions about that didn't happen. He says, "Well, Mr. Hogue, how do you explain this?" And well, it's simple, Ian. I was wrong. I got it completely wrong. There was this pause. And then he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is an important moment in coast to coast history. This must be the first time in all the years of Coast to Coast AM that a guest has admitted he was wrong." And it was an amazing thing because that went out all over North America and every Caribbean stuff. And it was interesting what happened. If you show your humanity, all these people, I won't name names, but I've been in this business a long time. I've been doing these shows since 1987 to all kinds of different media around the world. And, there's a whole lot of people with their hair on fire all the time. And it's just like you will actually gain a lot more following and interest if you admit your mistakes. It's like you can't be always right. And what kind of insecurity is it that you can't be wrong sometimes? It's just like, what's that about? Um, and that kind of tension will not make you a very good seer. Seers get it wrong. In fact, a lot of seers are trying to get it wrong. Nostradamus was trying to get a lot of things wrong. Unfortunately, he's not been listened to well. But with that said, um, so Edgar Casey used to say to Hugh Lynn, he said, "God, what did I do wrong? How did I, how did I get in the way? I got to look at that." His immediate reaction was not to be defensive. It was a egoless reaction, total heart reaction. And he's saying, "Yeah, well, I wonder if I can do something to better myself and not make mistakes like that." Of course, I would have said to him, says, "Is it really a mistake? Maybe it's not a mistake. Prophecy is the possible. It only becomes probable and true when we do things to bring it out of that vast ocean of potential to the surface." And so, but still, it's still factually wrong. Thank God, some of it. I like to be wrong about everything I just talked about in the last hour. Completely wrong. Mea culpa. And I'll be a happy clam for the rest of my life. So, um, so, will it come again? Well, first off, let's look at the backstory about the axis shift prophecies of Edgar Cayce, these earth changes prophecies. Um, Edgar Cayce wrote that there would be two waves if the earth was going to shift on its axis. The first wave he dated very accurately. It was around 1958 to 1960. He dated and named all kinds of things in seismic activity, Mount Etna erupting big time, the super quake in Chile, all of that. He's one of those rare guys who name dates, name details. It was very objective. It wasn't a lot of hairy-fairy stuff that could be interpreted any which way you want. Um, and so that the first wave of that was kind of the prelude, it happened. He was then expecting that the next wave, well, he actually already dead. He was already dead since 1945. These things happened in the late 50s. So, but he had also said before he died that the next wave would happen that would really bring on a potential axis shift was in 1998. Nothing happened. Nothing happened that he predicted about that. All the stuff that was going to bring the Pacific Ocean into Nebraska and with a complete collapse of all the mountainous states and all that, none of that happened. And I'm sure if his spirit was somewhere, he'd be scratching his head and said, "Wow, I really got that wrong. I'm sorry, everybody. I'll try to do better." So um I mean, there's always a chance because, that it could happen, that California and all that could sink in the ocean. I mean, I don't think it will, but I can't rule out the outside chance because I've seen too many times that, well, I mean, it's sometimes it often happens. Casey was really good at predicting dates, which is very rare. I mean, before the war even started, he was seeing World War II happening, and people would ask him in the late 30s, when do you think the America will get into the war? And he said 1941. And then when it was raging, people were asking him in his trance readings, when do you think this war will end? Our sons and daughters will come home. Said maybe 1944, but for sure in 1945. I think that was around when it was just starting, 41, 42, just after Pearl Harbor. And there's many I cite in my books, like the Millennium Book of Prophecy and other books. I cite these because it's very, very rare for somebody to get. It takes so many mechanical acts of chance to make a date come true. It's very hard, almost impossible. But Edgar Casey did it a lot. But he was also aware of free will and change. And so I don't think that the axis shift that he was talking about, or even when people start getting all excited like they did in the 90s about when the poles are always moving. Well, the electromagnetic pole of the planet. I've seen maps that they've charted out for thousands, millions of years, showing how this road map all across the top of the northern hemisphere near the polar region, where magnetic north has moved and moved long, 30 degrees, 20 degrees. When that if that flips, you won't even know it. It'll just do what the poles will do. It'll positive, will go woo, negative, positive, positive, negative, and it probably won't even make a swan fart. You know? So, there's that side of it. So no, Cora, I don't think it's going to happen. I think something changed. The only thing that we can say did happen was, and it may not have even, he might have been wrong in saying it's a way, but that cluster of seismic and tsunami and stuff activity, he almost got that 100% back from 1958 through 1960. But all the other Earth changes never happened. Well, maybe we did something right and avoided it.
I wanted to pivot to your take on the new strategy that was released by the Trump administration, pivoting to the Western Hemisphere and moving away from Europe.
Mm.
And I'm noticing also think tanks like CSIS or maybe even the Hoover Institute, questioning the strategy. Should we be decoupling from Europe? Should we be focused on this new Monroe Doctrine?
Mm.
So what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, the backstory is something we were talking about before the show. And this new paper, the strategic view, it comes out every year. Where basically the theme of what are our security issues in the world is put out there. Um, and I'm actually got a copy of it. I downloaded a copy of it as soon as it came out. I'm studying it. It's going to end up being dealt with word by word in detail in my February release because it it's momentous in really shifting it, kind of admitting and embracing the reality that the United States can no longer be a unipolar power. That it's over. It's already over. It's been over a while. And so, it's a good 30-year run. It's all done. And um, and how, pulling away from Europe, that this is a shift that's happening. I mean, NATO and the post-World War II world is ending. It is ending rapidly. And we're kind of coming into what will hopefully be a new way of looking at the world. There's, I since for a long time ago, I saw the BRIC nations were going to happen, and that they were going to be a whole global majority, uh, the doorway to a new global security reality. Um, the I think Trump has always been sincere in that he thinks NATO is a dead duck and, a white elephant. And it should, it's just a burden on the United States, and that the situation is such that the United States is pulling away from Europe. Um, Europe is entering a Europe has often in well, let's put it this way. Um, when you look at European empires, Rome had one chance to be an empire, and it was thousands of years. It was the Byzantine Empire. It didn't actually die out until 1453, when the Ottoman Turks took Constantinople. So it actually lasted 1500 years after the so-called fall of Rome. The Eastern Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire. But that was it. France had a shot twice in within a century of being an empire and colonial. The United States did a little bit of it, starting at the end of the 1900s, with its gunboat diplomacy and all of that, misreading the Monroe Doctrine, as just about every president has misread it. In fact, one of the things I'm going to talk about, I'm going to open a lot of the discussion about why this shift back to the Western Hemisphere, um, by actually letting you all read what President Monroe, in a congressional hearing, actually wrote about what the Monroe Doctrine was all about. And one of the things he put out a lot, stressed very much, is not regime changing people in our world, in our hemisphere. That, just the thing that we've been doing in South America and Central America since the day was long on the American existence. Um, that's not what the Monroe Doctrine is about. What the Monroe Doctrine is about was not seeing the European colonial powers try to come into the Western Hemisphere and dominate them, like they did Africa, like they did Asia. Um, that's one aspect of it. But the other thing too is the Monroe Doctrine is how many centuries now is how many? It's almost 200 years of Monroe Doctrine. It's a different world. And the thing that's happening that's kind of going to put a monkey wrench in all this idea. I mean, this idea that the Monroe Doctrine has given us in the Western Hemisphere the right to dictate, like dictators, to the rest of the Western Hemisphere. It's literally, you know, as I guess it was Colombian. I don't remember. Let's see. The conductor that currently runs the Los Angeles Philharmonic is one of my favorite conductors. I forget his name at the moment, but he's from Venezuela, and he's one of the most noted conductors. He actually has been very much involved in training a certain method that they have in Venezuela that actually turns kids into very talented symphonic players. And a lot of the students in Venezuela are populating all the classical music philharmonics around the world because of the Le System, I think it was called. And And so when he was being called a Venezuelan and stuff like this, he would just pleasantly remind people, said, you know, I'm an American too. I'm just as American as you are. I'm just a Southern American. But, you know, our hemisphere is Amerigo Vespucci decided to call our entire new world to the Europeans. It's not any newer than any other part of the world, but and the native people that came from Asia have been here 14 to 32,000 years. So it's got a lot of old history, just a little different. And so he was just saying, look, um, I am an American del Sud. You are an American del Norte. Mexico and Costa Rica is Amerigo del Centrale, you know, but I think what would be a better thing is if we just accept that all of the Western Hemisphere is American with different independently sovereign uh, versions of that. North America is America being one of them, Canada being another, Costa Rica, Venezuela, Peru. Um, and uh, so the rude awakening America is going to have is if we're dumb enough, if the Trump administration is dumb enough to attack Venezuela, may very well have to fight the entire continent of South America. You know, there will be so many soldiers going into there from everywhere in South America. Because I tell you, if you're actually looking at how people feel in South America about this, Yankee go home in big lane. He's like, get out of this idea that you have a right to bully us around. And the other thing too is that the world is changing. Hemispheric thought is changing. My master Osho used to say that this whole concept of East and West in the near future was going to shift to North, South. And, you know, America's going to have to deal with one of the great powers of this 21st century that's rising, not just China, but Brazil. And, you know, the what the BRICS is doing is giving respect and a space for people to interact in a world that they want to create, which is not perpetually run by the war business of the United States of America and its proxies, which are keeping the world in chaos just so they can make a buck on death. And the other thing is, this country is also tired of being the global cop. We people want to come home. People want that, yeah, Americans want a nation build. They want a nation build America. And so I think if Venezuela is attacked, it will only just more rapidly bring this reality into our lives is America, go home, take care of yourself, stop bothering us, start respecting your own needs, start living by example, not by preaching, because God knows we are not the shining city on the hill. We are the usurpers of other people. We have made our US dollar toxic. We have literally destroyed our own dollar. I say in every show, I said, if you want to get people to use the dollar again around the world, drop all the sanctions. Trump could drop all the sanctions on everybody, which is about a third of the world, and drop all the tariffs, that stuff, you know, this 100% stuff. I mean, I, clearly, I don't think that man's ever read a book. His intelligence is usually very instinctive, and sometimes works in realtor world, but uh, he didn't read that book on McKinley because
I don't think he read his own book.
yeah. In fact, he didn't even write his own book, even though it's his ideas that were taken down by the author. I've read it. But you know,
He's he's
I went back and refreshed myself about McKinley's use of tariffs, and it has nothing to do with what he's been doing, what Trump has been doing. It was very selective. It was basically, and it also doesn't have the background to have weight because what McKinley enjoyed, uh, a man who actually fought in the Civil War as a soldier and ended up a general. He was very involved in the Civil War, and he was also very involved in being part of managing politically the industrial explosion that tragedy created, that of industrial power. That by the end of the century, when he was president, it was becoming big enough, the steel industry and other selective industries, to compete with the British Empire and the new burgeoning German Imperial Empire and the French and all of that. But what was happening is that, and I think this is a more soft power version of the Monroe Doctrine, is that Britain and British Empire and the German Empire also make steel, used to, hardly anymore now. But the Krupp steel and the German steel was big, and they wanted to get a piece of the action in America. But what he did is he only selectively, McKinley, only selectively did tariffs, which were like maybe 5% and the most 10%, just to say, look, we're going to keep we're going to raise the tariffs on you if you try to make your steel cheaper than ours, forcing our people to buy it. We want to protect our burgeoning steel industry, um, and which was really the backbone of any industrial evolution during the industrial age, especially at that point. And so it was just a way to just keep the price fair and to make US steel more competitive by putting a little tariff on British steel so that it's more expensive, but not like 100%. That's his 8-year-old, Trump's 8-year-old that, you know, built his brother's building blocks, his wooden building blocks into a building, and he loved it so much that he glued it all together so his brother couldn't take it apart. That's Trump as the precocious 8-year-old when he admits he still is. So that's 8-year-old work. So, you know, it, I was talking to you before in our last show 2 weeks ago about how there's this looming situation is the whole Monroe Doctrine. I'm going to have to write in this new bit of Hogue prophecy reports is we're going to see in 2026 that that's also gone. Things that have been around a long time that have been defining the last couple hundred years, and sometimes upwards to 500 years if you look at European dominance of the world. That's all fading away. And hopefully it fades away without having some violent example like Venezuela could be. And that would then be another spreading of this World War III conventionally. Um, the I think Alexander Mercouris and some of the other people that I have as sources, I think some of my sources have been saying, um, probably Colonel McGregor, I think he said it, and then some others, that probably if Maduro is going to be taken out by the United States, all this carrier stuff is a bunch of show. You got like 20% of the U.S. Navy out there just off the coast and blowing through billions of dollars a year, just to be there. It's at a full readiness, which is kind of stressful for all those guys, those sailors and guys and gals. But I think often when I read the world and read the world, um, my job is kind of what I do when I do one-on-one readings, which is something also you can see on Hogue Prophecy, where you can get a one-on-one reading with me about the future potentials of your life and how in the eternity of the present to kind of bring them into fruition. Um, I do exactly the same when I read people one-on-one that I do with the world. It's just a little different way I do it. Like people, I say to people, I say, look, my empathic medium thing happens when the world tells me its story. Every day I'm watching it, telling its story in all its different ways. And then I kind of see, okay, my oracular thing says that's going somewhere, but that's going nowhere. If option three is option two is the one that has the most chance, and 80% of the time it's right. So I tell people in the readings first, tell me your story. Talk out what's going on with you, what you feel and all. And then things kind of go boom, 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 boom. And then I can read with cards or astrology and stuff. It clicks into gear. You see, my way of reading the world and reading people is completely passive. I don't do anything. My job is to do nothing. And that might sound easy, but it isn't. It is actually so ordinary easy that you confront all the ways in which you've been trained not to do things easy. But it's so ubiquitous. What I do is actually everyone has exactly the same space to do their lives in the same way, and equally unique to the way I do it. So anyway, it's a um so I the BRICS has changed the whole gestalt. The BRICS is developed. So this war, Trump is insightful enough to see the BRICS as part of a greater struggle of civilizations. He didn't say it very eloquently, but Trump has a lot of instinctive intelligence. Pretty remarkable channel sometimes. Even now, even with his struggles with cognitive problems and stuff, he still comes out sometimes. But he's one of the first people to publicly kind of understand. He said, "I want to shut down the BRICS," he's saying. He wants to tar off the BRICS out of existence because he understands that the US dollar is not going to be here much longer as any influence. And all the ways in which we have used the dollar to throw the burden of our debt on our client nations, that's ending, which means the debt's coming home, folks. And you can't live beyond your means anymore like we've been since, we were a famous country for paying as you go right up to 1941. And ever since the Second World War melded into the Cold War, we got two addictions. One's spend your way out of any problem, and two, make war a business, an industry. Not just Americans never did that until World War II was over. We always, in Civil War, we could turn it on and make the weapons and fight. And when the war was over, we went back to a small army, a few thousand cavalry guys in the West, and just back to civilian economy. But what happened because the Cold War happened, we got addicted to the defense drug. And even Eisenhower couldn't really address it until he was going out on his last day of his two-term presidency. He made the famous military-industrial complex speech, an absolute work of prophecy has been fulfilled. We are addicted to war. We have people around Washington in their mansions that are filthy rich over rendering human beings into filthy carrion. It's ill, it's immoral. It's a sin that is heavily burdening the entire American people. We are we are under its curse, and it's an addiction to war. And we've managed to spend since World War II, 1945, for 80 years now, we've been under this addiction and it's destroying us. So we have to stop doing that. Or we will have a civil war that will break up the United States in the coming 5 years into the 2030s.
We have a question, John. First, a comment by 10 Tigers. Sanctions, this is the comment. Sanctions on Japan helped start World War II.
Absolutely.
And the question is, what is the first thing we should fix to bring back our country? K to 12 education, cut defense spending, close down bases overseas.
Well, all of those 10 tigers, all of those immediately. It's time, we need to pack up and go home, and all those 800 bases where the sun never sets on an American weapon in our former empire. But the empire's over. First, we got to acknowledge the fact that times are changing. And the addiction has kind of put us in a holding pattern, this war addiction of 80 years. It's kind of gotten in our DNA a bit because we've been doing it for 80 years. That's like one, two, four, six, that's four generations. If you count a generation from birth to the moment that generation is an adult and now working in the society. Um, so, um, so yes, we have to we have to scale down our military situation. If we're going to be in the Western Hemisphere, then we don't need 16 aircraft carriers. Frankly, they're white elephants anyway. And I hope we're not dumb enough to have to find out how deep the white elephant sinks in the Caribbean, in the Persian Gulf, and lose like 20,000 sailors in one day, from all the ships. I mean, the aircraft carries about 4,500 crew. The older ones are 5,000. If we had gone into now with the three carriers, that's three times 5,000. It's in one day. The Japanese only lost 3,200 sailors and pilots in the Battle of Midway. But if we wanted to repeat a karmic echo of the Battle of Midway with Iran, uh, we could lose 20,000 people in one day and all the ships, and they will never be rebuilt. Do we have to go to the point where we have to see them sinking and in flames from hypersonic missiles that are fired hundreds of miles away? Do we have to see our task forces sunk 800 to 1,000 miles off the coast of Taiwan in the deep Pacific by a wave of hypersonic air launched and land launched um, intercontinental ballistic, well, regional ballistic missiles from China, which they have thousands of. And to the point about how to how Japan, through sanctions, through embargoes of oil and materials, I mean, I really do. I always have since I was young, and I try to dissuade myself from when I started reading about that. I read about The Rising Sun, which was John Toland's incredible book trying to see the Japanese side of what happened in World War II. And he was fortunately helped because his wife is Japanese and also a scholar. So she was able to read. She could read classic Japanese and stuff, and so she was amazing. She went into all the papers of the Japanese imperial period about the war and all. And boy, did I get an education from another point of view of how that all happened from their side and from the Japanese side. And it was, what else can one call when, I mean, this was the Achilles heel of the imperial empire of Japan, is that it relied almost all of its strategic sources of rubber, oil, fuel for the planes, for the fleet, was all coming out of America. And when they occupied Indochina after the fall of France in 1940, Roosevelt, he not only uh, put the strategic um, death knell on Japan. You do that to any country, they're going to go to war with you. If you can manage to cut off all strategic fuels and stuff to anyone, you're looking to fight a war. And Roosevelt also demanded that they got to get out of China and stop fighting in China. Now, I don't support what Imperial Japan was doing at all at that time, but from reading John Toland's book and his wife's incredible yeoman work and getting all the details and records straight and the meetings that were going on in the government before Tojo was in government, but the government had its factions for the Imperial Navy and the Imperial Army. of Japan. And they were basically say, look, if you want to try a peaceful solution, the prime minister then, I can't think of his name, sorry, but he was a civilian and not a general or a naval admiral or something like that. But he was saying, like, well, okay, we'll give you a chance. What the military, who really had a very much power in the politics of Japan at that time, said, okay, we'll give you 9 months while we were preparing for a strike on Pearl Harbor. We'll give you 9 months to negotiate this out, but at a certain point, the deadline has to be 9 months because any time after that, we're going to not be able to move our fleet or fly our planes, and they can just come in and take it all. So, um, yeah, I mean, if somebody did that to the United States, had an ability to cut off the in 9 months to 10 months our military from being able to function, guess what'll happen? We do exactly what the Japanese did. Now there was also Yamamoto, uh, who, as well as Kurebayashi, the two generals, one commanded Iwo Jima, the latter, and the former ended up being the supreme commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Now, these two men shared as officers, one Army, the Admiral Yamamoto, shared one thing in common. They were military attaches in the United States in the 30s. They both spoke English. They both traveled all over the United States to get a feel for what Americans were really like. Now, like any country, the Japanese of 1941 had their ideas about, or myths about Americans as being degenerate and weak and too busy partying and becoming dissolute and drinking too much and dancing and making love without your wife and all that. And they still thought that we were just, understand the code of Bushido, they would be considered, well, subhuman in that regard to the warrior honor and the warrior code, which a lot of modern Japanese admirals and generals believed that they were bringing back or continuing, sustaining, and advancing. Um, so he he was telling them, he says, look, it's quite prophetic what Yamamoto said. He said, if we go to war with the United States, remember, he said, our government our industry can produce 120,000 cars a year. The United States can do 5 times more. I saw the factories. The military potential, the industrial potential of the United States is, well, it's comparable to China's potential now in transactional, which is really the way economy should be judged. How big it is how many people are buying, selling, and making things, and so he said that if we go to war with the United States, we have to win it in the first 6 months. We have to take out all their Asian things, all their Asian fortresses and stuff, isolate any Australia, and eventually come back and finish Pearl Harbor because they didn't do it. They didn't even attack the fuel depots. If the third wave had gone in and taken out the fuel depots, the United States fleet, not just its carriers that survived, they would all be still in the water for 6 months. And the Japanese could just take everything, the islands and all, get them all defensed, and even take Hawaii chain, and then after that, say offer terms. Give back Hawaii, but you guys lost the war. They might have even raided the West Coast with uh, with the uh, with the fleet carriers, the elite fleet carriers. Well, that it's very interesting to note that 6 months into the war, early June 1942, the Battle of Midway happened, and Yamamoto was also running that. But that ended up the Japanese had I would say a cultural bias. They thought the Americans can't decode our code because they can't handle Japanese as it's an incredibly challenging language. But they just and they were wrong. Americans had broken the code. And and so the Americans, they had a war game, by the way, in the Imperial Japanese College where they they did a model example of what would happen if we attack, because they were going to attack the last island in the chain where there were some basically stationary aircraft carriers where American planes were midway. That's why it's called Midway, because mid in the Pacific. So their idea was they thought they were going to come in complete surprise with four carriers, not six. That was a mistake. Two other carriers were going to hit Juneau in Alaska, but they didn't have the six. Not a good move, in my view. Anyway, they thought surprise was on their side because how can these barbarians understand Japanese and decode things? So they were going to come in, land a whole bunch of Japanese to dig in, and then they were hoping the American fleet would be drawn out, and then their battleships and their carriers would take what was left of the U.S. Navy down to Davy Jones' locker. And and so um, they there was one scenario that one guy put out and one officer put out where, well, what if they know we're there and they're waiting northeast in the Pacific vastness to spring a trap on us? What if their carriers are already out there? And and what it showed was that they would sink two carriers, but they'd lose three of their own of the four. And the referees just said, no, no, that can't happen. And they threw that all out and said, no, that can't happen. Well, that's pretty much, they got one U.S. carrier and they lost all four. They got the number of carrier, Uh, anyway, so in one day, in about 10 minutes, the Imperial Japanese fleet lost all its carriers, and they only lost 3,200 men. It was tragic. In fact, it was so tragic that we don't have footage of it. They filmed, the Japanese war correspondents filmed all of it, but they hid it and destroyed the films, and they didn't tell their people for years what happened at Midway. And because basically what happened was they lost the war. They lost the war in one day, like we would if we were off the coast of Iran. Like if something, God forbid it doesn't happen, something would happen that, because right now there are a lot of Russian submarines now on station. Since we talked last, there's Russian submarines off Venezuela as well as and the Russian frigates. They're some of their top of the line frigates. They've got hypersonic anti-missiles and stuff like that. So what's basically, I hope the message of deterrence is saying is the Monroe Doctrine is no more a reality than we controlling in Russia the Black Sea. You know, it's a different world. And as much as Trump wants to play McKinley and wants to do the great powers thing that existed, it has some good ideas and merits as a transitional thing to go through. Spheres of influence. The world of the 1900 is not the world of 2026 coming. It's a world that where um, the global South, which is most of the Western Hemisphere as global South, will not stand for being bullied around by the Americans. And frankly, the Americans are not they're a giant with clay feet right now. And I just hope that we don't have to get our comeuppance by just keep being the bully. Because, I grew up in sandlot fights in the playgrounds and stuff. As the bully is there. And the bully never knows how to quit. He always thinks that everybody will cower around him and I know from my own experience, I had had enough. And suddenly I had a fire in me and I knocked him on his butt. And he was so surprised. It's like, and, I'm sure he grew up from that experience and other butt knockings. Maybe he was a nice guy now as he's grown up. He's probably as old as I am right now, if he's still around. But United States has been bullying people and just think they can get away with it. Well, we've entered a century where, and a decade where we can't. We can't. And so, and I hope that we don't have to, that this nuclear power doesn't get itself conventionally knocked on its butt. And then we go to a higher form of bullying, which ends everyone. So this is so, you know, I, if I'm scary, I am scary. I'm scaring myself, but I'm not rolling up into a little ball in a fetal position, just, oh, it's all doomed. No, the challenge, life, the way I understand the art of life is whatever it throws at you, make it an alchemical moment, spontaneous alchemical moment. If you're being intimidated by something and it's you're shrinking away, watch it, and then there comes a moment where we will turn cowardice into power. No, cowardness, cowardliness is you cannot be brave without being a coward. It's two sides of the same coin. And your consciousness can hold it and use it. So the world is getting tired of us being bullying, and we're going to get our butt thumped by a number of directions if we keep doing this. Kind of hoping we're smarter than that, but maybe a good slap across the face is what we need.
Since you were scary, we're going to be on a lighter note here with a question from Ten Tiger.
Ah,
What is your favorite food?
gosh. Well, I have a lot of favorite foods. I
Yeah, but
mean,
if you could pick
Japanese food
one,
is one of my favorite foods.
wait, what was it?
Japanese,
Really?
Chinese. I can live anywhere in Asia and be a happy clam. Uh, I ate well in India. I love Indian food. Um, I've lived around the world a lot of places. Um, yeah, I like Italian food very much. Um, I cook Italian food a lot. Um, Mediterranean diet. I love Greek food. Um, I love Italian food, Spanish. Um,
But
if
like,
I
what?
could pull the meat off it, I love French food because they put meat even in the salads. I'm a vegetarian. I have a rare blood type where vegetarian really makes me thrive. I'm not against meat. I used to eat meat for first 25 years of my life until I discovered that it, every time I'd enjoy it, I'd be sick. I'd be kind of feeling like, "Bleh," because I have a blood type, I think it's B negative or something like that, that's positively against meat. And ever since 25, when I stopped eating any fish, chicken, or meat, I started becoming very healthy and full of energy. So it's
Wow.
just it's one of those weird
My
things.
favorite food is Chicago style pizza
Deep
or
dish.
deep dish.
When I look at
My
that,
favorite food.
well, I remember Jay Leno taking a Chicago deep dish slice, and he's like this old overeating guy, and he bit into it, and then he had a thing wired so his heart literally exploded as he ate it. Went. No, I like New York style myself.
Yeah, it just
Back in Langley, in my little village here, we have one of the best New York style pizzerias in the planet. And Anchorage has one of the best pizza I've ever had was up in Anchorage, Alaska in mid-January 19 no 2018 2019, yeah, or January. And I was doing lectures at the Adam place up there, and I ate pizza. We went to this pizzeria because it had been told it's like the one of the best in the world, and it was. And it's like right on the edge of the world somewhere. It's like the diner at the end of the galaxy. This is the pizzeria at the end of the world in Alaska. So anybody listening from Alaska, you know which one I'm talking about in Anchorage.
I would say my second favorite dish is a gyro.
Is a what?
A gyro, a lamb gyro.
Mm, yeah, gyro. Now, gyro is Mexican, right?
No, no, no.
Oh,
It's
no, it's Greek.
Mediterranean. It's yeah,
Yeah,
Greek.
it's Greek. Yes, of course. Yes, it's Greek. Yeah, gyro I love.
Yeah.
I also love Mexican food, real Mexican food, not the food where you have this lovely little Mexican dish that is entombed in a pile of American cheese. I mean, I finally, when I got to Mexico to do do interviews for the El Efecto Nostradamus, which is the Nostradamus Effect series, which I imagine some of you have seen me on. I had a lot to do with outlining about five of those shows based on my ideas. Anyway, they invited me to go down in another January in 2010 to go down and speak in Mexico City. So I finally got to really go to the heart of Mexico and I remember when we were having our first meeting and I'm having my huevos rancheros with only a sprinkling of beautiful goat cheese and not this like slab of sarcophagus of yellow melted cheese that you have to shovel out of the way to find the I looked up from the huevos and I said, now I've really ate huevos rancheros. I'm also a big fan of really good tequila.
Maybe we should do a show on just cuisine.
Yeah, well, yes. The future of food.
That'd be interesting. Like like in 100 years from now, will food really change? The cuisine of regions change.
Well, I have a book of essays where I'm taking a lot of, because I'm getting too old to write them into full books. So I'm just going to do essays about well, some of those 80 books that I have planned are going to end up as essays in a anthology that will look at subjects of interest, of human interest from the present. And some of them I'll take them 4,000 years into the future. Food food, sex, and so, a lot of those things will be looked at. Reincarnation, how are we going our relationship with reincarnation, that'll be it there. Of course, UFO, AFWs, whatever they call them now. All that, our future in space, also completely radical ideas that I was going to make into a book, one of my last fictional books, but I'm just going to put the formula out in an essay and just look at I am having a hard time finding a way to talk about a system that actually doesn't take you anywhere, but that's how you get everywhere in the universe. Um, the only author that I've encountered that kind of has a grasp on the ideas is Orson Scott Card in the Ender series and Jane and all that. And I went, oh, now I don't feel so alone.
I was watching one of the chefs. His name's Oliver, and he was doing a series of different cuisine in Italy. And what's
Mm.
fascinating is the differences in northern Italy versus southern Italy.
I've seen some of those documentaries
It's,
or
it's
some like that.
yeah.
Oh, I was in Italy. I was in Florence for a month or two working on my first book's design. And I went through Milano and we've passed and then in Po Valley and then I was in Florence, Firenze. I mean, oh God, if you want real Italian food, well, in fact, when I find a good, like one of the supermarkets here has a puttanesca that is from Italy, and it tastes like puttanesca from Siciliano, Calabria, and so yeah, I mean, I watch shows. Sometimes I'll really binge on just watching a guy in different restaurants. They go around in Florence, and he's making Central Italian food. He's making
Mhm.
Northern Italian, which has more Germanic backgrounds because the Lombardy tribe is actually Germanic. So, it's not surprising that Mussolini spoke German because he's from Northern Italy. Uh, but yeah, I mean, from the white sauces down to the red sauces, and you might paint a food flag that would have half of Italy getting more yellow and cheesy colored up to the Alps and then getting redder and redder and
Yeah, no, that's
dripping with olive oil down to Siciliano, you know.
even
And
the way
so,
they prepare the bread. Some breads, depending on the region, have olive oil in it. Some don't.
oh yes, it's just and then there was also I have an ear for music because I used to classical music and it's given me a ear for accents and dialects. And I used to listen as we were making the book. There was an olive presser. I mean, this was the place that I was at was on the hills that overlooked the Duomo from the east side, east end of the hills overlooking Florence. And he had another more palatial palace-like place that he lived on the western side of Florence, on that side of the Arno River. But um, this hotel that we're renting the whole thing for our publishing house. It used to be owned by Caruso, the famous Italian tenor. That was his first place before he went over there. And spectacular views of the valley. You could sit out with a real glass, not a wine glass, but just a round glass, drink your wine, don't have a little boop, boop, and sit and kick back. And there's the Duomo over there, and there's the marbleized city hall. And then you look up to here, and there's Frisola, the mountain fortress, ancient. And then when you realize that Nostradamus was in Florence, and he writes a lot of quatrains and stuff about Italy. He writes a lot about Milan, so he traveled all through there. And no, I mean, oh yes, it's there's, and then it's also as an American, it was my first really strong experience. I get up like before dawn and walk. It was August, so we walk up into the higher hills of Tuscany, and you realize for the first time as somebody from the Western Hemisphere, a young country, that there can't be a stone that hasn't been turned by a human hand in this area. I mean, Florence is one of the oldest dwellings. It goes back to like 8,000 BC. People were living down there in the Arno Valley. So everything, all the trees, all the bushes, humans have planted them or moved them. The thing that then you start to appreciate when you come back to the United States is how much of it is wild, that nobody's moved and no people have done anything with it. It's like Europe might have been wild 10,000 years ago. And so, and Alaska is like, it's just beyond that. It's just like, it's beyond wild, which is wonderful. We had giant moose. I mean, in my backyard here, I have little deer that like to sleep in my backyard. But if I were in Alaska, there'd be 3 or 4 huge honking moose laying there. I know because they were outside the door when I was there in the middle of winter, that while ago. But yeah, no, it's no, it's I love Thai food. I love um, yeah, even vegetarian hamburgers. I'll eat. Um,
Well, the chat really lit up.
oh, good. We found a
Right
way
when we were
in.
talking about food.
All
So,
right. Okay.
so they
Well,
did
yeah, the future of
they,
food is definitely something I'm going to have in my essay. One will be about the future of food.
the future of food. Okay, so we're near the end of the show here, John. So if you could explain to the audience the periodicals and the readings, and I want to remind the audience in the description, please click the link to John's website and sign up for the periodicals and the readings.
Yeah. Yes, well, I have, as I was saying earlier and interjecting, I do readings. They can be about 2 hours long. So it's really, but it'll be the fastest 2 hours you've ever experienced. That's what a lot of people experience with it. And then it's on Zoom like this. There's 2 ways I can do it. We can do what I do is where I do, some people, it really thrives if people have 40 minutes and a 10-minute break to get up, stretch, and get around, come back for another 40 minutes. And then it's usually about 3 40-minute sessions with 2 10-minute breaks in it. So a lot of people love that. But if you want an uninterrupted one, and if you're on Zoom, and you're already paying on Zoom, then you can just send me an invitation, and I'm there as long, 3 hours straight without a break. So those are the two options. Um, the you know, if you go to hoagprophecy.com, you're going to find a little ad right at the top of the default page that says Hogue Readings, and basically it has an email. It's you just click on that email, and all you need to do, and it's important to do because I my email system's wide open because I don't want any robots censoring stuff. So of course I have to spend time clearing out all the junk. So with all the hundreds of emails that I get, all you need to do is put on the subject line. If you want to write some more, that's fine, but just put on the subject line, Hogue Reading. I'll see that. And then as soon as I see it, I'll get back to you and give you the times and how much it costs. And, um, you know, I would, since I am a celebrity, I will not do what most celebrities do, charge through the nose. Because then I'm only talking to rich people, and I love rich people. I love poor people. I love everybody in between. But I wanted to find a number that I had a yes for because I put a lot of work into the reading. And I found it, and it allows me to have a full spectrum of people come. So anyway, so that's there. So that's the one thing. Of course, in the same website, you're going to see, and soon. Actually, already, if you type in John Hogue on X, just not on X, but just type in the search John Hogue, that'll take you to what I'm still catching up putting in is my Hogue Prophecy Bulletins also have a free sampling on X. And so hopefully next week I'll have them all up to date. But then you can do the same thing. You can sample these things free. It actually looks better than on my website in some respects because I'm still waiting. The person that's going to do it is having a delay doing this update. So I'm going to soon have my website cell phone friendly. So, um, but if if you yeah, that's the other thing too that I send my Hope Prophecy reports to subscribers on an email, but I also send a little blurb on the beginning of it where you it's in an Adobe file, so the PDF file, so you can download for free Liquid, this beautiful system that makes your cell phone easy read. The only other way, if you want until another few months, if you have a laptop, you can read my Hope Prophecy Bulletins easier there. You're not kind of having to move it around. But soon that's all going to change. And certainly if you're a subscriber to my Hope Prophecy reports, yeah, you can read it on Liquid. And it reads formats just fine, easy to read, fine on the phone. So um, yeah, so my next one is going to be out in February, but anybody that's new or returning after a long time not being a subscriber, I'm going to give you this amazing one, the last one I did, which talked about, well, it was an amazing one. All kinds of things, the future of America, what happened to Charlie Kirk, how Charlie Kirk is a karmic echo of John Brown and a potential, kind of a prophet. The prophet John Brown is really a very interesting read. He was a very different person than he's been portrayed. I mean, if you watch Santa Fe Trail, he's always got his eyes on fire, crazy, long bearded like me. Well, I don't have the hair going up like that. Um, like a toucan. But he actually was a very thoughtful man. Now, he was a man of action, and when he had reasoned after decades of thinking it out and this is, by the way, John Brown was on the Underground Railway. He was actually trying to save slaves, going deep into the South, um, and worked with Tubman, the lady, Harriet Tubman. They knew each other. Um, he was I discovered it was quite a journey to really find out who the real John Brown was, and he was a lot more interesting than just some fire-breathing prophet. And he has a distinction, I will add, that he's one of the rare prophets in history that got all of his prophecies right. So that's a great opening read right there. The other is then about Charlie Kirk and the parallels that are there with him. And it'd be interesting to read some of the things I was saying then, because now things have gotten so much more involved with the Candace Owens trying to ask difficult questions, and then the kind of odd reactions from his widow. Um, anyway, that's a whole other story, but there's a whole lot of great things in that one packed full. It's 18 articles in, these are magazine size reports that I do. I write my own Time magazine every couple months. So, so yeah, you can have it for $60 for a year, or you can have it, and then what'll happen is you pay the thing. I have a link to PayPal from my website page to jump off, and this is a kind of pink kind of page, and you go in there and you just go to the donate or thing, and basically it'll take you in, and it gives you the options on my PayPal page. And I get a report that you're in. I'll write to you and confirm it, and yeah, and then I will give you these, and hopefully it'll open your eyes to a whole new world. And a lot of stuff I talk about is not negative. It's sometimes very funny. Can't laugh at doomsday. What can you laugh at? We're gonna laugh doomsday off the map. That's what we're gonna do.
Well, just, I do want to remind the audience to make sure you click the link so you get to John's website. Please help support John's work by signing up for the periodical. And
Keep me eating Italian food, otherwise.
well, I think on our next show we should talk about what Nostradamus ate.
Well, he wrote a cookbook.
Oh, okay. Well, don't spill the beans
No,
yet.
no, 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 I won't. I
We'll
won't
do
do
that
that.
next show.
But yeah, I'll have to bone up on it. But yeah, he wrote Traites des Fardamans, his treatise on pharmacists, and it's where he talked about his travels. He talked about how he fought the plague in Aix-en-Provence, and it's quite an amazing story. And yeah, and he had quite an extensive amount of it's very interesting. People have actually published his cookbook. Uh,
All right. Well, we'll talk about that.
yeah,
Okay. So everybody, thank you for joining. I greatly appreciate it. The ones that were watching on YouTube and the ones that were listening on X Spaces. Again, these shows we try to do every other week, and it's supposed to involve the audience. So please make sure that you queue up with the questions next show, and John will answer them. So thank you, John, for doing this every other week. And
thank you, everybody. Thank you,
yeah,
Paul.
yeah, no problem. And everybody, you have a nice holiday, safe holiday. And John, say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye to everybody.
All right. All right. Hold on, John. Shut everything down.